I never thought a simple piece of paper could shatter my world, but that's exactly what happened on a quiet Tuesday morning at my flower shop. The note was tucked between the stems of a fresh delivery of peonies, crisp white paper folded into perfect quarters, like something you'd pass in high school. My name is Kala, and until that moment, I thought I had everything figured out. Successful florist, loving husband, and 16 weeks pregnant with our first child. But life has a way of pulling the rug out from under you when you least expect it. Your husband isn't who you think he is. Ask him about Sarah from the Denver office. I read those words at least 10 times, my hands trembling more with each pass. The morning sickness I'd finally gotten over threatened to return as I sank onto my work stool, the scent of flowers suddenly overwhelming. "Hey, boss lady." My assistant Maya's cheerful voice made me jump. I crumpled the note and shoved it into my apron pocket. "Those centerpieces for the Thompson wedding are ready for your final approval." "Thanks, Sal. I'll check them in a minute." I forced a smile, but Maya's expression told me I wasn't fooling anyone. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just pregnancy stuff," I lied, waving her off. "The baby's not a fan of the lily fragrance today." Maya nodded sympathetically and returned to her work, leaving me alone with my thoughts and that damned note burning a hole in my pocket. Declan and I had been married for 3 years. He traveled frequently for his tech executive job, including regular trips to the Denver office. But Sarah? He'd never mentioned to Sarah. My phone buzzed with a text from him. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up." Something cold settled in my chest as I stared at those 7 words. How many times had I received that exact message over the past few months? I'd always trusted him, attributed his late nights to the promotion he'd been chasing. Now every late meeting and business trip took on a sinister new meaning. The bell above the shop door chimed, and I quickly wiped my eyes. An elderly woman walked in, heading straight for the roses. I watched her carefully select a dozen pink ones, her wedding ring catching the light as she examined each bloom. "Anniversary?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady as I wrapped her flowers. 52 years today," she beamed. "My Harold still brings me flowers every week, but I thought I'd surprise him this time." "That's beautiful," I managed, though my throat felt tight. "He's a lucky man." After she left, I pulled out the note again. The paper was expensive, the kind used in corporate offices. The handwriting was neat but distinctive, definitely a woman's. I took a photo with my phone before carefully refolding it. That evening, I sat at our dining room table until 9, pushing food around my plate. When Declan finally came home, his tie was loose and his hair slightly disheveled. He kissed my cheek, smelling of unfamiliar cologne. "You didn't have to wait up, honey," he said, dropping his briefcase by the door. "You need your rest." "I wanted to," I replied, studying his face. "How was your day?"
Busy.
"The Denver team's giving us trouble with the merger." He loosened his tie further. "Actually, I might need to fly out there next week." My heart skipped a beat. "Denver? Will you be working with Sarah?" The pause was brief, barely a second, but it was enough. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes before he answered. "Sarah? I don't think I know a Sarah in that office." In that moment, watching my husband lie so effortlessly to my face, I realized 2 things. The anonymous note was real, and the man I married was a stranger. As he headed upstairs to shower, I placed a hand over my growing belly and made a silent promise to our child. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I spent the next morning going through old photos on my phone, searching for any hint of Sarah in the background of Declan's work events. My sister Avery sat across from me at her kitchen table, her coffee growing cold as she watched me spiral. "You need to eat something," she said, pushing a plate of toast toward me. "The baby needs more than your anxiety for breakfast." I ignored the toast but rubbed my growing belly absently. "He lied to my face, Ave. About Sarah." I saw it in his eyes. "Men lie about all sorts of things," Avery said, reaching for my phone. "But jumping to conclusions won't help. What else has changed recently?" I thought about it while she scrolled through my photos. The late night started about 3 months ago. New cologne. Private phone calls. God, I'm such a cliche. You're not. Avery stopped scrolling suddenly, her expression changing.
Wait,
Is this from the company Christmas party? She turned the phone to show me a group photo. Declan stood near the edge, his arm around a tall woman with auburn hair. They weren't touching inappropriately, but something about their body language made my stomach turn. That's Sarah, I whispered, recognizing her from her LinkedIn profile that I'd found last night. He said he didn't know her. The doorbell rang, making us both jump. Avery went to answer it, and I heard Evelyn's voice in the hallway. My mother-in-law appeared moments later, carrying a casserole dish and wearing a concerned expression. Declan called, she said, setting down the dish.
he's worried about you.
Said you've been acting strange and sleeping at Avery's. Did he mention why I might be upset? I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Evelyn sat down, her perfectly manicured hands folded on the table. No, but I'm not blind, dear. Something's wrong, isn't it? I slid my phone across the table, showing her the Christmas party photo. Do you know her? Evelyn studied the image, her face carefully neutral. Sarah Winters. She's new to the Denver office. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I met her at the Hendersons' anniversary party last month. Declan didn't mention she'd be there. Declan claims he doesn't know her at all. Something flickered across Evelyn's face, disappointment, maybe anger. She opened her mouth to respond, but was interrupted by my phone buzzing. A text from an unknown number lit up the screen. Check his credit card statements. Dinner for two at La Maison Rouge every Thursday night. My hands shook as I showed the message to Avery and Evelyn. La Maison Rouge was the most expensive French restaurant in the city, definitely not where Declan's usual business meetings took place. I need to see those statements, I said, standing up. They're in his home office. Calla, wait. Evelyn caught my arm. Let me talk to him first. If what you're suggesting is true. No. I cut her off. I need to know for myself. I drove home in a daze, rehearsing what I'd say if Declan was there. But the house was empty, his car gone from the driveway. In his office, I found the statements easily. He'd never bothered hiding them before. Every Thursday for the past 3 months, La Maison Rouge, $300 plus.
My phone buzzed again.
Another unknown number. Check the jewelry store receipt in his jacket pocket. The one from last week. I froze, remembering the navy blazer he'd worn to work yesterday. It was still draped over his office chair. With trembling fingers, I reached into the pocket and pulled out a crumpled receipt. A diamond bracelet, worth more than I made in 2 months at the flower shop. I'd never received a diamond bracelet. The front door opened downstairs, followed by Declan's footsteps.
Gaya?
Are you home? I stood there, receipt in one hand, credit card statements in the other, as his footsteps approached the office. In that moment, I made a decision. I quickly took photos of everything and slipped the evidence back where I'd found it. There you are, he said from the doorway, smiling that perfect smile that used to make me weaken in ease. What are you doing in here? I forced myself to smile back. Just looking for a pen. My hand unconsciously moved to protect my belly. Actually, I was thinking about dinner. How about La Maison Rouge on Thursday? His smile faltered just for a second, but it was all the confirmation I needed. Thursday night arrived with the weight of inevitability. I sat in my car across from La Maison Rouge, watching the valet parking area through a light drizzle. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white, and the baby kicked restlessly, sensing my tension. Declan's silver Mercedes pulled up right on schedule. I watched him step out, straightening his tie before walking around to open the passenger door. Sarah emerged in a sleek black dress, her hand lingering on his arm as they walked inside. The diamond bracelet sparkled on her wrist. My phone buzzed. Avery, don't do anything crazy. Think of the baby. I texted back, just gathering evidence. But we both knew I was lying. Inside, I gave the maitre d' my name. I'm meeting my husband, Declan Rivers. His eyes widened slightly. Monsieur Rivers? He's already seated with a guest. I know, I said quietly. That's why I'm here. He led me through the restaurant, past candlelit tables and intimate conversations. I spotted them in a corner booth, their heads close together over a bottle of expensive wine. Declan was laughing at something Sarah had said, his hand resting on hers. "Your table, madam," the maitre d' announced loudly. Declan's head snapped up. The color drained from his face as I slid into the booth next to Sarah, who jerked her hand away from his like she'd been burned. "Don't stop on my account," I said, picking up a menu. "The Coke au vin looks amazing. Is that what you usually order here?" "Every Thursday." "Calla," Declan started, his voice strained. "This isn't. We're discussing work." "Really?" I turned to Sarah. "The bracelet was for work too? It looks lovely on you, by the way. Though I imagine it's awkward wearing jewelry from another woman's husband." Sarah stood abruptly, gathering her purse. "I should go." "Please don't," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "I have questions. Like how long you've been sleeping with my husband. Before or after you found out I was pregnant." The restaurant had grown quiet, nearby diners pretending not to watch the drama unfolding. Declan reached across the table, his face a mask of controlled panic. "You're making a scene," he hissed. "Think about my reputation." "Your reputation?" I laughed, the sound hollow. "I'm thinking about our child. The one you apparently forgot about while buying expensive dinners and jewelry for your mistress." Sarah bolted then, leaving her wine glass half full. Declan started to rise, his eyes following her, and something inside me snapped. I grabbed his wine glass and emptied it over his pristine white shirt. "Go ahead," I said. "Chase after her. Show everyone exactly who you are." He sat back down, jaw clenched. "You're being hysterical. This isn't good for the baby." "Don't you dare," I whispered, tears finally spilling. "Don't pretend you care about this baby when you've been—" My voice caught as a sharp pain shot through my abdomen. I gasped, clutching my stomach as another wave hit. Declan's anger turned to alarm.
Calla?
"What's wrong?" "I don't." The room started spinning. Something's not right. Through the haze of pain, I heard Declan calling for help. Someone mentioned an ambulance. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was Evelyn rushing through the restaurant doors, her face a storm of fury directed at her son. I woke up in the hospital to the steady beep of monitors and Dr. Lin's concerned face. He explained that stress and elevated blood pressure had caused complications, but the baby was stable for now. Strict bed rest was mandatory. Evelyn sat in the corner, her usual perfect posture rigid with tension. "Declan's in the waiting room," she said quietly. "I told him to stay out until you're ready." "I'll never be ready," I whispered, touching my belly. "How do you face someone who's destroyed everything you believed in?" "You don't," she replied, taking my hand. "You focus on healing. And then you make them face the consequences of their actions." The monitor's steady beeping filled the silence as I closed my eyes, remembering those anonymous notes that had started everything. I still didn't know who sent them, but I was beginning to understand why. Some truths need to be exposed, no matter how painful the revelation. 3 days into my hospital stay, Dr. Lin delivered news that made my heart stop. "The placenta is showing signs of distress," he said, pointing to areas on the ultrasound screen. "Your blood pressure isn't stabilizing the way we'd hoped." I clutched the thin hospital blanket, trying to steady my voice. "What does that mean for the baby?" "It means choices, Calla." He sat on the edge of my bed, his kind face serious. "You need absolute rest and zero stress for the remainder of your pregnancy. That means no work, no confrontations, and definitely no more restaurant incidents." A soft knock interrupted us. Declan stood in the doorway, wearing a fresh suit and carrying a bouquet of roses, store-bought, not from my shop. Dr. Lin excused himself, giving Declan a look I couldn't quite read. "The nurses said you're not eating," Declan said, placing the flowers beside my bed. "Funny how betrayal kills the appetite." He sighed, loosening his tie. "I've been thinking, maybe we should try counseling." "Now you want counseling?" I laughed bitterly. "After I end up in the hospital?" "I want to fix this," he said, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. Fix what, exactly? The affair? The lies? Or just your public image? Before he could answer, my phone buzzed. Another anonymous text. Check his email. Password is Sarah's birthday, 0517. My heart raced as I deleted the message. Declan was watching me closely. Who was that? Avery, I lied. She's bringing me some things from home. He nodded, but something in his expression changed. I need to get back to the office. Graham called an emergency meeting about the Denver merger. After he left, I pulled out my laptop. My hands shook as I typed in his email password. It worked. Dozens of emails between him and Sarah filled the screen, dating back 6 months. They were careful, using coded language about project deadlines and client meetings, but some messages were more explicit. Plans for a weekend getaway. Photos. Promises. A new email notification popped up from Graham Henderson to all senior staff. My blood ran cold as I read it. Effective immediately, all Denver office operations will be relocated to our Singapore branch. Staff transfers will be finalized by end of month. Another message appeared below it, from Sarah to Declan. We need to talk. Now. I was still staring at the screen when Evelyn arrived. One look at my face, and she closed the door behind her. What did he do now? I turned the laptop toward her. She read in silence, her expression hardening. Singapore, she finally said. He was planning to leave. The baby and I were just inconvenient obstacles. My voice cracked. He never wanted this family. Evelyn's phone rang. Graham Henderson's name flashed on the screen. She answered on speaker. Evelyn, is Calla with you? She needs to hear this. I'm here, I said. I just fired your husband, Graham said without preamble. The board discovered he's been falsifying reports to cover unauthorized expenses. The Denver merger was his excuse to embezzle company funds. The monitor beside my bed started beeping faster as my blood pressure spiked. How long? Evelyn demanded. At least 6 months. Sarah Winters was helping him hide the transactions. They're both being investigated. Dr. Lin rushed in, alarmed by the monitors. He took one look at my vitals and ordered everyone out. Wait, I called to Graham. Who sent the anonymous notes? Who exposed them? There was a pause on the line. That would be my wife. She oversees all executive expenses. When she saw the pattern, the rest of his words faded as Dr. Lin injected something into my fore. As consciousness slipped away, I heard him telling Evelyn they might need to consider early delivery if my condition didn't improve. In my last moments of awareness, I realized something important. Revenge wasn't going to save my baby. I needed to let go of Declan's betrayal and focus on survival, not just for me, but for the innocent life depending on my choices. The monitors slowly steadied as I made my decision. Some battles aren't worth fighting. Some victories come from walking away. 2 weeks after being released from the hospital, I found myself standing in our walk-in closet, staring at the dress Declan had insisted I wear to tonight's company gala. Despite Dr. Lin's orders for bed rest, Declan had been relentless about my attendance. It's crucial for appearances, he'd said that morning. The board needs to see we're still a united front. The dress was new, emerald green silk that probably cost more than a week's worth of flower shop revenue. A peace offering, or maybe just another attempt to control the narrative. My phone buzzed. Another anonymous text. Sarah will be there tonight. So will the FBI. I deleted the message just as Declan appeared in the doorway. You're not dressed yet? I shouldn't be going at all, I said, one hand resting on my expanded belly. Dr. Lin was clear about Dash. Dr. Lin doesn't understand what's at stake. Declan's voice was tight, controlled. 2 hours. That's all I'm asking. Then you can come home and rest. The way he said home made something twist inside me. This house hadn't felt like home since the first note appeared in my flower shop. At the gala, Declan kept his hand firmly on my lower back, steering me through crowds of executives and their spouses. Their smiles felt practiced, their eyes calculating. Everyone knew about his firing, about the investigation, but nobody dared mention it. Mrs. Rivers, Graham Henderson appeared beside us, his wife Patricia close behind. "You look lovely tonight. Though I must say, I'm surprised to see you here given your condition." Declan's hand tightened on my back. "We wouldn't miss it. In fact, I was hoping to discuss Dash." "I don't believe we have anything to discuss." Graham cut him off coldly. "Patricia, why don't you show Calla to the terrace? Some fresh air might do her good." Before Declan could object, Patricia led me away. Outside, the night air was cool against my flushed skin. "The agents are already here," Patricia said quietly, nodding toward two men in dark suits by the bar. "They're waiting for Sarah to arrive." She agreed to turn state's evidence. My legs wobbled. Patricia guided me to a chair. "You knew," I whispered. "You sent the notes." She squeezed my hand. "I've seen too many good people destroyed by men like Declan." When I found the discrepancies, the terrace doors burst open. Sarah strode out, her face pale but determined. Behind her, Declan looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Tell her," Sarah demanded, her voice shaking. "Tell your wife what you promised me." Declan stepped forward, his facade cracking. "Sarah, don't dash. He said you lost the baby." Sarah turned to me, tears in her eyes. "He said you had a miscarriage months ago, but were pretending to still be pregnant to trap him. That's why he needed the money, to start over with me in Singapore." The world tilted. Through the roaring in my ears, I heard gasps from the growing crowd of onlookers. The FBI agents moved closer. "Is that what you told everyone?" My voice sounded strange, distant. "That I'm crazy? Faking a pregnancy while you played the sympathetic husband." "Calla, I can explain Dash." "Mr. Rivers." One of the agents stepped forward. "We need you to come with us." Everything happened fast after that. Declan trying to run. The agents catching him. Sarah crying as she handed over documents. Graham making statements to the press gathering outside. Through it all, I sat perfectly still, one hand pressed against my very real, very active baby, who chose that moment to kick hard enough to make me gasp. Evelyn appeared with my coat and car keys. "Let's get you home, dear." "Not that house," I said, standing carefully. "I can't go back there." She nodded, understanding. "Then we'll go somewhere new. Somewhere you can both heal." As we left through a side entrance, I caught a glimpse of Declan being led to a waiting car, handcuffed and defeated. Our eyes met briefly. In that moment, I realized something important. Revenge hadn't brought me peace, but the truth had set me free. My baby kicked again, stronger this time. A survivor's kick. Like mother, like child. The morning after the gala, I sat in Graham Henderson's office, watching him review security footage from the company's parking garage. On the screen, Declan and Sarah hurriedly loaded boxes into his car 3 nights before the arrest. "Financial records, offshore account details," Graham explained, pausing the video. "They were planning to destroy everything before the FBI caught up with them." I touched my belly, feeling sick. "How much did he steal?" "Nearly $4 million. Graham slid a folder across his desk. "But that's not why I asked you here. These are the texts between Declan and the board members." My hands shook as I read messages where Declan had systematically painted me as unstable, delusional. He'd convinced everyone I'd lost the baby months ago but couldn't accept it, claiming my mental state was why he needed to handle all our finances. "He was setting me up," I whispered. "If everything went wrong, you'd be the perfect scapegoat." Graham's voice was gentle. "A grieving, mentally unstable wife who forged his signatures while he tried to protect you." The baby kicked hard, as if protesting the lie. A sharp pain followed, making me gasp.
Got ya?
Graham stood, concerned. "Should I call Dr. Lin?" "I'm fine," I lied, but another pain hit, stronger this time. Within minutes, I was in an ambulance, Evelyn holding my hand while paramedics monitored my vitals. Dr. Lin met us at the hospital, his face grim as he reviewed the readings. "The stress has triggered early labor," he said. "We need to stop it. You're only at 30 weeks." Hours passed in a blur of medications and monitors. Avery arrived, then Patricia Henderson. Through the haze of pain and fear, I heard them discussing Declan's bail hearing. He's claiming temporary insanity, Evelyn said quietly. His lawyer wants Calla's medical records to prove she's unstable. He can't, Avery protested. After everything he's done, another contraction silenced their conversation. Dr. Lin checked the monitors, shaking his head. The medications aren't working, he announced. We need to prepare for delivery. It's too soon, I pleaded, panic rising. The baby's not ready. Your blood pressure is dangerously high. If we wait. The rest of his words faded as reality crashed in. This was Declan's final betrayal, not just destroying our marriage or my reputation, but potentially our child's chance at a healthy life. A nurse appeared with admission papers. As I signed them, she handed me an envelope. This came for you, at the front desk. Inside was a familiar piece of white paper, but this note wasn't anonymous. I'm sorry for my part in all this. I never knew about the baby. He told me so many lies. Sarah. The paper crumpled in my fist as another contraction hit. Through the window, I could see reporters gathering outside the hospital. Someone had leaked the story. Don't let them in, I gasped. Don't let them turn this into another headline. Nobody's getting past me, Avery promised, her voice fierce. You focus on my niece or nephew. Dr. Lin started preparing for the emergency C-section. As they wheeled me towards surgery, Evelyn stopped us. Graham just called, she said. Declan made bail. His lawyer's requesting an emergency hearing about custody, claiming you're not fit. The monitor screamed as my blood pressure spiked again. Dr. Lin ordered everyone out, shouting for additional medication. In that moment, lying there while they rushed to save my baby, I realized how completely Declan had orchestrated my destruction. Even from jail, he was still trying to control the narrative, to paint me as the villain in his story. Stay with us, Calla, Dr. Lin urged as my vision began to blur. Your baby needs you to fight.
Fight.
That's what I've been doing since the first note appeared in my flower shop. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about survival. For me, for my child, for the truth itself. As they pushed me into surgery, I made one final promise to my baby. We would write our own story, and Declan wouldn't be the author of either of our fates. 3 days after my emergency C-section, I woke to find Evelyn sitting beside my hospital bed, her face drawn with worry. My daughter, Rose, was still in the NICU, fighting for every breath, but getting stronger each day. Declan's here, Evelyn said quietly. He's demanding to see the baby. I tried to sit up, wincing at the pain from my incision. He can't dash. I know. Security's keeping him in the waiting room, but... She hesitated. There's something you need to know about my son. She pulled out an old photograph, a young Declan, maybe 7, standing between 2 adults I didn't recognize. His foster parents, Evelyn explained. Before I adopted him. They were embezzlers too, convinced Declan to help them forge documents. When they were caught, they abandoned him, claimed he'd tricked them. The pieces started falling into place. That's why he tried to frame me? He repeats patterns when he's scared. But that doesn't excuse Dash. A commotion outside interrupted her. Declan burst in, followed by security guards and Avery, who looked ready for war. Where is she? He demanded. Where's my daughter? Sir, you need to leave. A guard started, but I held up my hand. Let him stay. The room cleared except for Evelyn, who stood protectively beside my bed. Declan looked terrible, unshaven, suit wrinkled, eyes wild. The lawyers say I have rights, he said. You can't keep her from me. Rights? My voice shook. Like my right to a safe pregnancy? My right not to be gaslight and betrayed. I never meant. He ran his hands through his disheveled hair. Everything just spiraled. Sarah, the money, the lies. I couldn't stop. Like your foster parents couldn't stop? He flinched as if I'd struck him. Mother, what did you tell her? The truth, Evelyn said firmly. Something you should try sometime. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Rivers? Your daughter's oxygen levels are improving. Would you like to see her? Declan stepped forward, but I shook my head. My name is McBride now, and only I'm going to see her. She's my child too. His composure cracked. You can't erase me like they did. No one's erasing you, Declan, I said quietly. You did that yourself. Every lie, every betrayal, every attempt to make me look crazy, those were your choices. I'll fight you for custody, he threatened, but his voice wavered. With what? I asked. Your embezzlement charges? Your documented attempts to frame me? The text messages to the board calling me mentally unstable. He slumped against the wall, the fight draining from him. I don't know how to fix this. Start by fixing yourself, Evelyn said. Turn yourself in, take responsibility. Show your daughter who you really are, not who you're pretending to be. A soft knock interrupted us. Dr. Lynn stood in the doorway with Graham Henderson and 2 FBI agents. Time to go, Mr. Rivers, one agent said. Your bail's been revoked. As they led him away, Declan turned back. Her middle name, he said softly. Could it be Evelyn? After the only parent who never gave up on me? I looked at his mother, saw the tears in her eyes, and nodded. Not for him, but for the woman who'd chosen to love an abandoned child, who'd stood by me when that child lost his way. Rose Evelyn McBride, I said. A name with both roots and new beginnings. After he was gone, I let the nurse wheel me to the NICU. Through the incubator glass, I watched my daughter's tiny chest rise and fall, each breath a victory. You're nothing like them, Evelyn said, touching the glass. Either set of parents. You chose truth over revenge, strength over bitterness. I placed my hand over hers. We all have patterns, don't we? The trick is knowing which ones to break. In the quiet beeping of the NICU monitors, I found peace in that broken pattern. In the knowledge that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go of the past to protect the future. 6 months after Rose came home from the NICU, I reopened my flower shop. The morning sun streamed through the windows as I arranged fresh peonies, the same flowers that had held that first anonymous note so long ago. Those are pretty, Avery said, bouncing Rose on her hip. My daughter's laugh, still new and precious, filled the shop. But maybe we should stick with roses, given her name? I smiled, touching a soft peony petal. Sometimes beautiful things can bring painful memories and hope at the same time. The bell chimed as Patricia Henderson entered, carrying a familiar white envelope. This came to our office, she said, handing it to me. Declan's lawyer asked us to forward it. I'd heard he'd taken a plea deal, was serving time while attending intensive therapy. The envelope felt heavy in my hands. You don't have to read it, Avery said quietly. But I did. I needed to know how this story ended. Inside was a letter, along with legal documents signing away his parental rights. His handwriting was different, less controlled, more honest somehow.
Calla.
The therapist says I should start with the truth. So here it is. I was terrified of becoming my foster parents. Every lie I told, every betrayal, was me running from their shadow. But in trying to escape their pattern, I created my own. Rose deserves better than a father who might repeat that cycle. She deserves the strength and honesty you've shown. I'm signing away my rights not because I don't love her, but because I love her enough to protect her from my demons while I learn to fight them. Take care of our daughter. Tell her whatever truth you think is right when she's older. And know that despite everything I did, you are always stronger than any lie I could tell. Declan. Evelyn arrived as I finished reading, carrying coffee and pastries. She'd been my rock these past months, proving that family isn't always about blood or broken promises. He's doing the work, she said, seeing the letter in my hands. Real work this time. I know, I replied, watching Rose grab at a sunflower with tiny, determined fingers. But some breaks can't be unbroken. The morning crowd began trickling in, regular customers who'd stood by me through the scandal. New faces drawn by the story of renewal in the local paper. I helped them choose flowers for celebrations, apologies, fresh starts. Graham Henderson stopped by later, not for flowers but with news. Sarah's testimony helped recover most of the stolen funds. The board voted to establish a trust for Rose's education.
You didn't have to do that, I said.
No, he agreed. But sometimes justice looks like giving someone a future untainted by the past. As the day wound down, I sat at my workbench, designing arrangements for a wedding. Rose slept peacefully in her carrier, surrounded by the scent of flowers and new beginnings. Avery had gone home, but Evelyn lingered, arranging roses with surprising skill. "You know," she said, "healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means growing something new from broken ground." I looked around my shop, at the flowers that had held the first warning, at the daughter who emerged from the final crisis, at the chosen family who helped me survive it all. The desire for revenge had faded, replaced by something stronger, the peace of choosing my own path. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for showing me that patterns can be broken. S." I deleted Sarah's message without responding. Some chapters need to stay closed, even as new ones begin. Rose stirred, reaching up with perfect tiny fingers. As I lifted her, a peony petal drifted down, landing in her open palm. She clutched it, not destroying but holding, teaching me one final lesson about beauty and strength. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even or dealing justice. Sometimes it's about proving that broken things can bloom again, different but whole, in gardens of their own making. I tucked the petal into my daughter's baby book, marking not an ending, but a continuation, our story, growing wild and free, exactly as it should.
The plastic stick trembled in my hand, two pink lines staring back at me like accusatory eyes. After years of disappointment, this should have been a moment of joy. Instead, dread coiled in my stomach as I imagined Jake's reaction. "Alice, you've been in there for ages. What's going on?" Jake's impatient voice carried through the bathroom door. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Coming," I called, my voice surprisingly steady. Stepping into our bedroom, I found Jake sprawled across the bed, flicking through his phone. He barely glanced up. "Well, another negative?" I swallowed hard. "Actually, it's positive." The silence that followed was deafening. Jake's eyes snapped to mine, narrowing with suspicion. "What did you say?" "I'm pregnant, Jake. I held out the test, my hand shaking slightly. We're going to have a baby." Jake sat up slowly, his face a mask of disbelief. "That's impossible. We've been trying for years." "I know, but did you cheat on me?" The accusation hit me like a slap. "What? No, of course not." I recoiled, hurt and anger flaring inside me. "How could you even think that?" Jake stood, towering over me. "Well, it doesn't make sense, does it? All those fertility treatments, all that money wasted, and suddenly you're pregnant? It happens, Jake. Sometimes it just happens," he scoffed, pacing the room. "Right. And I'm supposed to believe that?" "Yes," I cried, frustration building. "Because it's the truth. This is our baby, Jake. Ours." Jake stopped, turning to face me with a cold look in his eyes. "I don't want it." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What?" I said. "I don't want it." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Get rid of it." I stumbled back, clutching the test to my chest. No, I won't do that." "Alice, be reasonable," Jake said, his tone patronizing. "We're not ready for this. Our marriage is already hanging by a thread." "Because of you," I shot back, finding my voice. "Because you've been distant and cruel, treating me like I'm broken, just because I couldn't get pregnant." Jake's face darkened. "Watch it, Alice. You're getting hysterical." "No, I'm not," I said, straightening my spine. "I'm finally seeing things clearly. This baby is a miracle, Jake, and if you can't see that, then what?" he challenged, stepping closer. I met his gaze, unflinching. "Then maybe we shouldn't be together anymore." Jake's laugh was harsh. "Oh, that's rich. You think you can make it on your own? With a baby?" "I'd rather be alone than with someone who doesn't want our child," I said, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. For a moment, something like regret flashed across Jake's face, but it was quickly replaced by a sneer. "Fine. Have your precious baby. But don't come crawling back when you realize how hard it is." He stormed out of the room, leaving me alone with the weight of his words. I sank onto the bed, one hand instinctively moving to my still flat stomach. The test was still clutched in my other hand, those two pink lines a promise of a future I'd dreamed of for so long. But not like this. Never like this. My phone buzzed, startling me. It was a text from my mother, Brenda. "How did it go, sweetheart? Did you tell him?" I stared at the message, tears finally spilling over. How could I tell her that my marriage had just imploded? That the man I thought I knew had revealed himself to be a monster? With shaking fingers, I typed out a reply. "Can I come home?" The response was immediate. "Of course. We're here for you, always." I looked around the room at the life Jake and I had built together. It all seemed hollow now, a facade hiding years of pain and resentment. But as I placed a hand on my stomach again, I felt a flicker of hope. This baby was my future now, and I would do whatever it took to give us both the life we deserved. The suitcase felt impossibly heavy as I dragged it down the stairs. Each step was a battle against gravity and my own doubts. Was I really doing this? Leaving everything I'd known for the past decade? "Where do you think you're going?" Jake's voice, cold and mocking, froze me in place. I turned, my hand instinctively moving to protect my stomach. "I'm leaving, Jake. I can't stay here anymore." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "And where exactly are you planning to go? Back to Mommy and Daddy?" The condescension in his tone sparked a fire in me. "Yes, actually. At least they'll support me and this baby." Jake's laugh was cruel. "Support you? Alice, you're 40 years old. You really think you can start over now? As a single mother?" I lifted my chin, meeting his gaze. "Watch me." For a moment, something like uncertainty flickered in Jake's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a sneer. "Fine, go, but don't come crawling back when you realize how hard it is out there." "I'd rather struggle alone than stay here with you," I shot back, surprised by my own vehemence. Jake's face darkened. He took a step towards me, and I instinctively backed away, bumping into the wall. "You ungrateful bitch," he hissed. "After everything I've done for you." "Done for me?" I interrupted, anger overriding my fear. "You mean like blaming me for our fertility issues? Treating me like I was broken? Making me feel worthless?" Jake's hand shot out, gripping my arm painfully. "I gave you everything, Alice. A home, a life." "Let go of me," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Now." For a tense moment, I thought he might hit me, but then he released me, stepping back with a look of disgust. "Get out, and don't bother trying to come back. You're on your own now." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my suitcase and headed for the door, my heart pounding. As I reached for the handle, Jake called out, "You'll regret this, Alice. You're nothing without me." I paused, turning to face him one last time. "No, Jake, I was nothing with you, but not anymore." With that, I stepped out into the crisp morning air, closing the door on 10 years of my life. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with my phone, dialing my mother's number. "Alice?" Brenda's voice was thick with sleep. "Honey, what's wrong, Mom?" I choked out, tears finally spilling over. "Can you come get me? I left Jake." There was a sharp intake of breath. "Oh, sweetheart, of course. Your father and I will be there as soon as we can. Where are you?" I looked around, realizing I had no idea where to go. I'm still outside the house. I don't know where." "No," Brenda interrupted firmly. "Don't stay there. Go to the diner on Main Street. You remember Diane? She'll look after you until we get there." Relief washed over me. Okay, I can do that. We'll be there soon, Alice. I love you." "I love you too, Mom." As I ended the call, I noticed a curtain twitching in the upstairs window. Jake was watching me, his expression unreadable. I squared my shoulders and turned away, dragging my suitcase down the driveway. Each step felt like a small victory, carrying me further from the life I'd known and closer to an uncertain future. But as I walked, I felt a flutter in my stomach, so faint I might have imagined it. My hand moved to rest there, a small smile tugging at my lips despite everything. "It's just you and me now, little one," I whispered. "But we're going to be okay, I promise." As I rounded the corner, leaving my old life behind, I felt a mix of terror and exhilaration. I had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. Whatever came next, I would face it head-on, for myself and for the tiny life growing inside me. The familiar creak of my childhood bedroom door jolted me awake. For a moment, I forgot where I was, panic rising in my throat. Then I saw my mother's silhouette in the doorway, and reality came crashing back. "Alice, honey, are you awake?" Brenda's voice was soft, tentative. I pushed myself up, wincing at the wave of nausea that hit me. "Yeah, Mom, I'm up." She stepped into the room, concern etched on her face. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," I admitted, managing a weak smile. "But I'll live." Brenda sat on the edge of the bed, her hand finding mine. "Your father's making breakfast. Think you can stomach some toast?" The thought of food made my stomach churn, but I nodded. "I'll try." As we made our way downstairs, the smell of coffee and bacon hit me like a wall. I stumbled, gripping the banister. Alice? My father's worried voice carried from the kitchen. I'm okay, I called back, taking deep breaths. Just morning sickness. I entered the kitchen to find my father, Michael, standing at the stove, spatula in hand. His eyes widened as he took in my appearance. Good Lord, sweetheart, you look terrible. Thanks, Dad, I said dryly, sinking into a chair. Just what every woman wants to hear. He had the grace to look sheepish. I'm sorry, Are you sure you're all right? I nodded, accepting the glass of water my mother handed me. I will be. It's just a lot to process. Michael turned off the stove, joining us at the table. For a moment we sat in uncomfortable silence. Then he cleared his throat. Alice, we need to talk about what happens next. I tensed, bracing myself. What do you mean? Well, he began, exchanging a glance with my mother. You can't stay here forever. You need a plan. Michael, Brenda warned, but he pressed on. No, we need to address this. Alice, you're 40 years old. You're pregnant, unemployed, and, well, let's face it, you've been out of the workforce for years. Each word felt like a blow. I blinked back tears, anger rising to replace the hurt. So what are you saying, Dad, that I should go crawling back to Jake? No, both my parents exclaimed in unison. Of course not, Brenda said firmly. But your father's right about one thing. We need a plan. I slumped in my chair, suddenly exhausted. I know, I don't know where to start. Michael reached across the table, taking my hand. We'll figure it out together, sweetheart. But first things first, we need to get you to a doctor. The thought sent a jolt of panic through me. A doctor? Why? To make sure everything's okay with the baby, Brenda explained gently. And, well, to discuss your options. I recoiled, yanking my hand away. My options? You mean? Alice, Michael said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle, we just want to make sure you've considered everything. This isn't going to be easy. I know that, I snapped, pushing away from the table. But this baby is all I have left. I'm not giving it up. Brenda stood, approaching me cautiously. No one's asking you to, sweetheart. We just want to make sure you're prepared for what's ahead. I softened slightly, letting her pull me into a hug. I know, Mom. I'm scared, but I have to do this. As I pulled away, a sharp pain lanced through my abdomen. I gasped, doubling over. Alice? My father's voice sounded far away. What's wrong? I looked down, horror flooding through me at the sight of blood on my pajama pants. No, I whispered. No, no, no. The room spun as panic set in. My mother's arms were around me, her voice urgent in my ear. Michael, call an ambulance. As darkness crept in at the edges of my vision, one thought consumed me. I couldn't lose this baby. I couldn't lose the only good thing left in my life. The last thing I heard before unconsciousness claimed me was my father's frantic voice on the phone. Please hurry, my daughter. I think she's losing the baby. The first cry of my newborn son pierced the air, and with it, every doubt and fear I'd harbored over the past months evaporated. Tears streamed down my face as the nurse placed him in my arms, his tiny body warm against my chest. Hello, little one, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. I'm your mom. My parents crowded around the hospital bed, their faces a mix of joy and relief. The journey here hadn't been easy. After the scare in my first trimester, every day had felt like a battle. Against my body, against the whispers of doubt, against the ghost of Jake's cruel words. But now, looking into my son's eyes, I knew it had all been worth it. He's beautiful, Alice, my mother said, wiping away her own tears. My father squeezed my shoulder. What are you going to name him? I smiled, running a finger along my son's cheek. Ethan, it means strong. As the days passed and we settled into a routine at my parents' house, the reality of single motherhood began to sink in. Sleepless nights blurred into exhausting days. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me, constant and unyielding. One particularly rough morning after Ethan had been crying for hours, I found myself in the kitchen, desperately trying to warm a bottle with one hand while bouncing him in the other. Shh, please, Ethan, I begged, my own tears threatening to fall. Mommy's trying. Here, let me help. My mother's voice startled me. She took Ethan from my arms, cooing softly to him. I slumped against the counter, suddenly bone-weary. I can't do this, Mom. I'm not cut out for this. Brenda's eyes softened with understanding. Oh, sweetheart, every new mother feels that way sometimes. But you're stronger than you know. As if to prove her point, Ethan's cries quieted as she rocked him. I watched, a mix of gratitude and envy washing over me. "I need to find a job," I said, the words tasting bitter. "I can't keep relying on you and Dad." My mother nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Actually, I might have an idea about that. Do you remember Diane from the diner?" I frowned, vaguely recalling the kind-faced woman who'd sheltered me the day I left Jake. "Sort of. Why?" "Well, I ran into her yesterday. She mentioned they're short-staffed at the diner. It's not much, but it's a start." Hope fluttered in my chest, quickly tempered by doubt. "I don't know, Mom. I haven't worked in years. And what about Ethan?" "Your father and I can watch him while you're at work," she said firmly. "Alice, this could be good for you, a chance to get back on your feet." I looked at my son, now sleeping peacefully in my mother's arms. The thought of leaving him, even for a few hours, made my heart ache. But I knew she was right. I needed to do this, for both of us. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "I'll do it." The next day, I found myself standing outside the diner, Ethan strapped to my chest in a baby carrier. My hands shook as I reached for the door handle. "You've got this," I whispered to myself, echoing my mother's words from that morning. As I stepped inside, the bell above the door chimed. Diane looked up from behind the counter, her face breaking into a warm smile. "Alice, I'm so glad you came," she said, coming around to greet me. Her eyes softened as she noticed Ethan. "And who's this handsome little man?" I swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "This is Ethan, my son." Diane's smile widened. "Well, aren't you two a package deal? Come on back, let's talk about getting you started." As I followed her, I felt a strange mix of terror and excitement. This was it, the first step towards our new life. I had no idea what challenges lay ahead, but for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. With Ethan's warm weight against my chest and the promise of a fresh start before me, I squared my shoulders and stepped into the unknown. The diner's bell chimed, and I looked up from wiping down the counter, my customary greeting dying on my lips. There, framed in the doorway, stood Jake. My heart stuttered, then raced. He looked different, expensive suit, perfectly styled hair, a gleaming watch on his wrist. But his eyes, cold and calculating, were just as I remembered. "Well, well," he drawled, sauntering in, "if it isn't my runaway wife." I gripped the counter, willing my voice to remain steady. "What are you doing here, Jake?" He smirked, sliding onto a stool. "Can a man visit his hometown? Although I must say, I'm surprised to find you here." His gaze swept dismissively over the diner. Before I could respond, a woman entered behind him. Tall, blonde, and impeccably dressed, she exuded an air of wealth and confidence. Jake's smirk widened. "Alice, meet Nancy, my wife." The word hit me like a physical blow. Wife? How long had it been since I'd left? A year? 18 months? Nancy extended a manicured hand, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "So you're Alice. I've heard so much about you." I shook her hand, automatically, my mind reeling. I'm sorry, I didn't know Jake had remarried." Jake laughed, the sound grating on my nerves. "Oh, there's a lot you don't know, Alice. For instance, did you know that while you were off playing house with Mommy and Daddy, I sold the company? Made quite a tidy profit, too." The implications of his words sank in slowly. The company we'd built together, the one I'd walked away from when I left him, he'd sold it without a word to me. "You had no right," I hissed, anger replacing shock. Jake's eyes hardened. "I had every right. You abandoned everything, remember? Including your shares in the company." I opened my mouth to argue, but at that moment, Diane emerged from the kitchen, Ethan in her arms. "Alice, honey, I think someone needs his mama." Jake's gaze snapped to my son, his expression unreadable. "So this is the brat, huh? Doesn't look like much." Red clouded my vision. I snatched Ethan from Diane, cradling him protectively. "Don't you dare talk about my son like that." Nancy laid a hand on Jake's arm, her smile brittle. "Now, darling, let's not cause a scene. We just came to deliver the news, remember?" Jake nodded, his smirk returning. "Right you are, my dear. Alice, we thought you should know we're moving back to town. Bought that big house on Maple Street. You know the one." I did know it. It was the house I'd always dreamed of living in, back when Jake and I were trying to start a family. "Why?" I managed to choke out. "Why come back here?" Jake stood, adjusting his cufflinks. "Let's just say I have some unfinished business to attend to." "Oh, and Alice, you might want to have a chat with your lawyer. There are some discrepancies in our divorce settlement that need addressing." With that, he strode out, Nancy in tow. The bell chimed again, leaving an oppressive silence in their wake. I slumped against the counter, my legs suddenly weak. Ethan whimpered, sensing my distress. "Oh, honey," Diane said softly, coming around to support me. "Are you okay?" I shook my head, tears threatening to spill. "I don't know. I thought I was finally free of him." As I held Ethan close, inhaling his sweet baby scent, a terrible realization dawned. Jake was back, and he clearly had an agenda. Whatever game he was playing, I was woefully unprepared. But looking down at my son, I knew I couldn't run again. This was our home now, our life. I'd fought too hard to build this new reality. "Diane," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "can you watch Ethan for a bit? I need to make a call." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Of course, sweetie. Take all the time you need." As I stepped outside, phone in hand, I took a deep breath. I didn't know what Jake was planning, but one thing was clear. I needed to be ready. For Ethan's sake and for my own, I had to fight back. With trembling fingers, I dialed a number I never thought I'd use again. "Hello, this is Alice Thompson. I need to speak to a lawyer. It's urgent." The manila envelope felt heavy in my hands, its contents threatening to upend my world once again. I'd been avoiding it for days, but with Jake's latest threat looming over me, I couldn't put it off any longer. Taking a deep breath, I opened it, spreading the documents across my kitchen table. As I read, my heart sank. Jake hadn't just sold the company, he'd systematically stripped it of assets before the sale, funneling millions into offshore accounts. "Oh, God," I whispered, my hands shaking. This was why he'd come back. He was covering his tracks, and I was the loose end. A knock at the door startled me. I hastily gathered the papers, shoving them back into the envelope. "Coming!" I opened the door to find Nancy standing there, looking decidedly less polished than the last time I'd seen her. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into the house. "Please, come in," I muttered sarcastically, closing the door. "What do you want, Nancy?" She turned to face me, her expression a mix of anger and desperation. "I want the same thing you do, to take Jake down." I blinked, sure I'd misheard. "What?" Nancy sank onto my couch, suddenly looking exhausted. "Jake's been cheating on me with multiple women, and that's not even the worst of it." My mind reeled. "The company? You know about that?" She nodded grimly. "I found out last week. He's been embezzling for years, Alice, and now he's trying to pin it all on you." The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. "On me? How?" "He's claiming you were involved in the financial decisions before you left, that you knew about the offshore accounts." Nancy's eyes met mine. "He's setting you up to take the fall." A wave of nausea hit me. "But that's not true. I didn't know anything about it." "I believe you," Nancy said softly. "That's why I'm here. I want to help." I laughed bitterly. "Help? How could you possibly help?" She reached into her purse, pulling out a flash drive. "Because I have proof. Emails, bank statements, everything, but I can't use it without implicating myself. That's where you come in." My head spun with the implications. "You want me to turn him in?" Nancy nodded. "It's the only way, Alice. If we don't act first, he'll destroy us both." I sank into a chair, my mind racing. Could I trust her? This woman who'd married Jake, who'd looked at me with such disdain in the diner? As if reading my thoughts, Nancy leaned forward. "I know you have no reason to trust me, but think about your son, Alice. What kind of future will he have if Jake succeeds?" Ethan, my beautiful boy, sleeping peacefully in the next room. The thought of him growing up with Jake's shadow looming over us made my decision for me. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm in. What's the plan?" Nancy's relief was palpable. "We gather all the evidence, then go to the authorities. But we have to move fast. Jake's getting suspicious." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text. It was Jake. "We need to talk. Come to the house tonight, alone." I showed Nancy the message, my heart pounding. He knows something's up. She stood, suddenly all business. "This is our chance, Alice. Go to the meeting. Wear a wire. I'll be nearby with the evidence. If we can get him to confess." The enormity of what we were planning hit me. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about justice, about securing a future for my son, about finally breaking free from Jake's influence once and for all. "All right," I said, squaring my shoulders. "Let's do this." As Nancy left to make preparations, I looked at the photo of Ethan on my mantel. His innocent smile steeled my resolve. Whatever happened tonight, I had to succeed, for both of us. I picked up my phone, my finger hovering over Jake's message. With a deep breath, I typed my response. I'll be there. The die was cast. In a few hours, I'd be facing Jake one last time, and this time, I wouldn't be the one walking away with nothing. My heart pounded as I approached the house on Maple Street. The grand facade, once a symbol of my dreams, now loomed like a fortress of deceit. I touched the wire hidden beneath my blouse, drawing strength from Nancy's words. Remember, we only need one confession. Jake opened the door before I could knock, his smile predatory. Alice, darling, come in. I stepped inside, fighting the urge to flee. The house was immaculate, a stark contrast to the chaos about to unfold. Drink, Jake offered, already pouring himself a whiskey. I shook my head. Let's skip the pleasantries, Jake. Why am I here? He chuckled, sinking into an armchair. Always so direct. It's one of the things I admired about you, you know. Cut the crap, I snapped, my nerves fraying. What do you want? Jake's eyes hardened. I want you to sign some papers, a simple amendment to our divorce agreement. You'll relinquish any claim to the company's assets. I forced a laugh. The company you sold without my knowledge? Why would I do that? Because, he leaned forward, voice low, if you don't, I'll make sure you never see your precious son again. Ice flooded my veins. You wouldn't dare. Jake's smile was cruel. Wouldn't I? Think about it, Alice. Who would the courts favor? The successful businessman or the unstable single mother working in a diner? Rage boiled inside me. You bastard. You set this all up, didn't you? The company, the move back here, it was all to corner me. He shrugged, unrepentant. Business is business. I couldn't let you be a loose end. And Nancy? I pressed, praying the wire was picking everything up. Does she know about your business practices? A flicker of unease crossed Jake's face. Nancy's not your concern. This is between us. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. No, Jake. This is bigger than us now. I know about the embezzlement, the offshore accounts. Did you really think you could hide it forever? Jake's composure cracked. He surged to his feet, looming over me. You don't know anything. And if you breathe a word of this to anyone, I'll. The door burst open, revealing Nancy and two stern-faced men in suits. That's enough, Jake, Nancy said, her voice ice-cold. It's over. Jake's face drained of color. Nancy, what the hell is this? One of the men stepped forward, flashing a badge. Jacob Thompson, we're with the FBI. We have some questions about your financial dealings. As the reality of the situation sank in, Jake's shock turned to fury. He lunged at me, eyes wild. You bitch, you set me up. I stumbled back, but before Jake could reach me, the agents had him pinned. As they read him his rights, Jake's gaze locked on mine, filled with a hatred that chilled me to the bone. This isn't over, Alice, he snarled. I'll destroy you for this, you and that brat of yours. As they led Jake away, my legs gave out. I sank to the floor, trembling. Nancy knelt beside me, her hand on my shoulder. It's done, she said softly. We did it. I nodded, unable to speak. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me hollow. We'd won, but at what cost? Outside, I could hear Jake still shouting threats as they put him in the car. Each word was a dagger, reminding me that this victory was far from clean. Nancy helped me to my feet. Come on, let's get you home to Ethan. Ethan, my beautiful boy, the reason for all of this. As we stepped outside, the cool night air hit my face, and with it came a crushing realization. Jake's words weren't empty threats. As long as he was alive, Ethan and I would never truly be safe. I turned to Nancy, my voice barely a whisper. What have we done? Her eyes met mine, filled with a mix of triumph and fear that mirrored my own. What we had to do, Alice. What we had to do. As we walked away from the house on Maple Street, I knew that while one chapter had closed, another, potentially more dangerous one, was just beginning. The showdown was over, but the war? It had only just begun. The courtroom buzzed with tension as I took the stand. Jake sat at the defense table, his once impeccable suit now rumpled, his eyes burning with hatred. As I swore to tell the truth, I caught Nancy's encouraging nod from the gallery. Mrs. Thompson, the prosecutor began, please tell the court about your ex-husband's financial activities during your marriage. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Jake, Mr. Thompson, systematically embezzled funds from our company, hiding millions in offshore accounts. Jake's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled him. As I continued my testimony, detailing years of financial abuse and manipulation, I watched Jake's facade crumble. His smug confidence gave way to panic, then fury. When it was the defense's turn for cross-examination, Jake's lawyer tried to paint me as a scorned woman out for revenge. But I held my ground, my voice steady as I recounted the emotional abuse, the gaslighting, the threats against our son. "And why should the court believe you now?" the lawyer sneered. I looked directly at Jake as I answered. "Because I'm not afraid anymore. I have nothing left to lose and everything to gain by telling the truth." As I stepped down from the stand, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Whatever happened now, I'd done my part. The truth was out. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty on all counts. As the judge read out Jake's sentence, 15 years in federal prison, I watched the man who had once terrorized me crumble before my eyes. But it was Jake's final outburst that truly marked the end. As they led him away, he lunged towards me, spitting venom. "This isn't over, Alice. I'll get out. And when I do—" "No, Jake," I interrupted, my voice calm. "It is over. You have no power over me anymore." As the courtroom doors closed behind him, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to find Nancy, tears in her eyes. "We did it," she whispered. I nodded, my own eyes welling up. "We did." Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements, but all I wanted was to get home to Ethan. As Nancy and I pushed through the crowd, I spotted a familiar face, Diane from the diner, beaming with pride. "You did good, honey," she said, pulling me into a hug. "Now, let's get you home to that boy of yours." The drive back to my parents' house was a blur. As we pulled up, I saw my mother on the porch, Ethan in her arms. The sight of my son, safe, loved, free from Jake's shadow, brought fresh tears to my eyes. I scooped Ethan into my arms, breathing in his sweet baby scent. "It's over, little one," I whispered. "We're safe now." As we gathered in the living room, my parents, Nancy, Diane, and Hank, who'd closed the diner to be here, I looked around at this unlikely family we'd formed. Each person had played a part in getting us to this moment. "I don't know how to thank you all," I began, my voice thick with emotion, but Diane cut me off with a wave of her hand. "You don't need to thank us, honey. You did this. You found the strength to stand up to him, to protect your boy. We're just glad we could help." Nancy nodded in agreement. "Alice, you gave me the courage to face the truth about Jake. If anyone should be thanking someone, it's me thanking you." As the evening wore on, filled with quiet celebration and plans for the future, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Jake was gone, but more importantly, the fear he'd instilled in me was gone too. Later, as I tucked Ethan into bed, I made him a promise. "You'll never have to be afraid, my love. Mommy will always protect you." Looking down at my sleeping son, I realized that this moment, this love, was what I'd been fighting for all along. Not revenge, not justice, but the chance to give Ethan the life and love he deserved. As I closed Ethan's door, I caught sight of my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back at me was stronger, wiser, and more whole than she'd ever been. For the first time in years, I smiled at my reflection. The past was behind us now. The future, bright, hopeful, and ours alone, was waiting. My name is Anna Mitchell, and I'm 38 years young. For the past 9 years, I've poured my heart into my skincare clinic, which has grown into a sanctuary of beauty and tranquility in the bustling heart of the city. My life, seemingly serene, was about to face an unexpected storm. It was a regular Thursday evening when Ethan, my husband of 4 years, casually dropped a bombshell over dinner. "I think it's time for Mom to move in with us," he said, as if discussing the weather. I paused, a forkful of salad suspended in midair. "Move in, as in permanently?" The words felt heavy in my mouth. Ethan nodded, oblivious to my shock. "Yeah, since Dad's gone, she's all alone. It's the least we can do." The news should have been a discussion, a decision made together. But there it was, presented as a done deal. My mind raced with images of Mrs. Harper, Ethan's mother, a woman of strong opinions and an even stronger presence, invading our peaceful home. But Ethan, our apartment isn't exactly spacious. Where would she even stay? I tried to keep my voice steady, but inside I was a whirlwind of anxiety and frustration. "We'll figure it out. It's important to me, Anna." His tone left no room for argument. I wanted to protest, to explain that this wasn't just about physical space, but about our space, our sanctuary. But I saw the resolve in Ethan's eyes, and something inside me deflated. "Okay," I sighed. "If it's just for a while, we can make it work." Ethan smiled, relieved, but I couldn't mirror his sentiment. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, a sense of foreboding creeping over me. The following week, Mrs. Harper arrived, not with a suitcase, but with a moving company. Boxes upon boxes cluttered our once serene living room, and my heart sank. This was not temporary. It was a complete upheaval. "What's all this, Mrs. Harper?" I asked, trying to mask my dismay with a polite smile. "Oh, darling, I sold the house. This place is much nicer, and I thought, why not?" she chirped, her voice too cheerful for the gravity of the situation. I turned to Ethan, searching for an explanation, but he just shrugged. "Mom needs to be comfortable," he said. That night, as I squeezed past the boxes to reach my own bed, I realized the invasion had just begun. My home, my sanctuary, was slipping away, and with it, a part of my soul screamed in protest. But little did I know, this was just the tip of the iceberg. The real storm was yet to come. The arrival of Mrs. Harper marked the beginning of a new, uninvited chapter in our lives. Her presence, once sporadic, became a permanent fixture, transforming our home into a space I hardly recognized. One evening, about a week after her arrival, I found Ethan and his mother in the midst of a lively conversation in the living room, now cluttered with Mrs. Harper's belongings. "Anna, come join us," Ethan beckoned, his tone unusually cheerful. As I approached, Mrs. Harper's eyes scanned me with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. "Anna, dear, I was just telling Ethan how cozy this place is. Much better than living alone in that big old house." "Ethan, we talked about this being temporary," I whispered, trying to keep my composure. He brushed off my concern with a wave of his hand. "Mom's happy here. Isn't that what matters?" The conversation turned to mundane matters, but I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. This was not the agreement. This was not the life I had envisioned. In the following days, the situation worsened. Mrs. Harper, with her lavish tastes and disregard for boundaries, treated our home like her personal playground. The once orderly living room was now a maze of her possessions, and the tranquil ambiance I cherished was replaced by a constant buzz of her activities. "Ethan, we need to talk," I said one evening, finding him alone in the kitchen. "Your mother, she's taking over our home. We need to set some boundaries." He looked at me, his expression a mix of annoyance and indifference. "Anna, she's just trying to make herself at home. You're overreacting." "Overreacting? Overreacting? Ethan, look around. This isn't a home anymore. It's a storage unit for your mother's things." He shrugged, unmoved. "If you're so unhappy, maybe you should consider leaving." His words hit me like a physical blow. Leave? My own home? But as I looked around at the alien environment that my home had become, I realized he was right. This was no longer my sanctuary. It was time for me to reclaim my space, my peace. That night, with a heavy heart, I packed a suitcase with my essentials. I glanced around the apartment one last time, a silent farewell to a chapter of my life that was closing. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. I was leaving behind a part of my life, but I was also stepping into a new beginning, one where I would not be overshadowed by the whims of others. I found refuge in a modest hotel room that night, the city lights twinkling like distant stars. Alone with my thoughts, I reflected on the path that led me here. My journey from a passionate beautician to a successful clinic owner was a testament to my resilience and ambition. But my personal life, it seemed, had taken a detour I hadn't anticipated. Ethan and I had met in a serendipitous encounter at a local cafe. He was charming, with a carefree spirit that complemented my meticulous nature. Our relationship blossomed into marriage, a union I believed was built on mutual respect and understanding. Yet, here I was, feeling like a stranger in my own life. The following days were a blur of emotions and decisions. I temporarily relocated my clinic to a smaller, more affordable space and dove into work. It was my sanctuary, a place where I felt in control, empowered. But the image of our cluttered apartment, now overrun by Mrs. Harper's possessions, lingered in my mind. Ethan's words echoed in my ears, "Maybe you should consider leaving." It wasn't just about the physical space. It was about respect, about being heard. I realized Ethan's perception of our life together had been a facade, masking his apathy and entitlement. Determined to confront the situation, I arranged to meet Ethan at a neutral location, a quaint coffee shop where we had shared many moments in the past. "Ethan, we need to talk about everything." "About us," I began, my voice steady but laced with emotion. He looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with his coffee cup. Anna, I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to understand that what happened wasn't just about your mother moving in. It's about us, about how you disregarded my feelings, and my presence in our home. Ethan sighed, a look of realization dawning on his face. I didn't see it that way. I just thought, that's just it, Ethan. You didn't think about us, about me. You made a decision that affected both our lives without even considering how I would feel. The conversation was difficult, filled with moments of silence and unspoken truths, but it was necessary. By the end, it was clear that our paths had diverged. The love that once bound us had frayed under the weight of unmet expectations and unspoken grievances. As I walked away from the coffee shop, a sense of closure washed over me. It was time to turn the page, to start a new chapter in my life, one where I was the author of my own story. In the weeks that followed, I immersed myself in my work, finding solace in the familiar routines of my clinic. Each facial treatment I performed was not just a service to my clients, but a therapeutic ritual for my own healing. Yet, in the quiet moments, my thoughts drifted back to Ethan and the life we had shared. It was during one of these reflective moments that my phone rang. Ethan's name flashed on the screen, a jolt to my newfound tranquility. I hesitated but answered. Anna, we need to talk. Ethan's voice was tense, a stark contrast to his usual nonchalance. I agreed to meet him at our apartment, a place I hadn't returned to since the night I left. Stepping back into the apartment was like entering a time capsule, each room a reminder of the dreams and plans we had woven together. Ethan was waiting, his posture rigid, a nervous energy about him. Anna, I've been thinking a lot since our last talk. I realize I've been inconsiderate. Inconsiderate is an understatement, Ethan. My response was calm but firm. He nodded, accepting the rebuke. I know, and I'm sorry, truly, but I want to make things right. Can we start over? The offer hung in the air, heavy with the weight of our past. Part of me yearned for the comfort of what was familiar, of the love we once shared, but another part, stronger and more resolute, knew that some paths, once diverged, cannot be rejoined. Ethan, I appreciate your apology, and I believe you're sincere, but too much has changed. I've changed. We can't just erase what happened and start over. He looked crestfallen, the reality of my words sinking in. I guess I was hoping, but you're right. I just wish things could have been different. As I left the apartment for the last time, I felt a chapter closing behind me. It was a chapter filled with love, learning, and ultimately letting go. The pain of the past was still there, but it was now a part of the tapestry of my life, a tapestry I was weaving with new threads of strength and independence. As the days turned into weeks, my new reality began to take shape. I poured my energy into revitalizing my clinic, introducing new services and workshops that resonated with my own journey of self-care and empowerment. My clients, new and old, embraced these changes, and I found joy in their transformations, both skin-deep and beyond. The clinic became more than just a business. It was a testament to my resilience, a place where I could channel my experiences into something beautiful and healing. My confidence grew, not just as a businesswoman, but as an individual forging her path. It was during this period of growth that Ethan re-entered my life, albeit in a way I hadn't anticipated. One evening, as I was closing the clinic, my phone buzzed with a message from him. Hesitant, I opened it to find a plea for help. Anna, I'm in trouble. Can we talk? The message was vague, but something in the tone suggested a seriousness I couldn't ignore. We agreed to meet at a local park the following day, a neutral ground amid the autumn leaves. Sitting on a park bench, Ethan looked different. The carefree demeanor was gone, replaced by a weariness that seemed to weigh on him. Anna, I messed up, he began, his voice strained. After you left, things with my mom got out of hand. I didn't realize how much we were spending, how much debt we were accumulating. I'm drowning. His words were a confession, an admission of the chaos he had found himself in. As he spoke, I felt a mix of emotions, surprise, sympathy, but above all, a reaffirmation of the decision I had made to leave. Ethan, I'm sorry you're going through this, but I can't help you. You need to take responsibility for your actions and find a way to deal with this. He nodded, a resigned acceptance in his eyes. I know, I guess I was hoping for a miracle. Our conversation was brief, but it was clear that Ethan's journey was taking a different path, one filled with its own challenges and lessons. As I walked away, I realized that while our lives had diverged, I hoped he would find his way, just as I had found mine. Life has a way of coming full circle, and in the months that followed, this adage proved true. My clinic flourished, becoming a beacon for those seeking not just beauty treatments, but also a sense of community and empowerment. I had found my stride, balancing the demands of my business with the fulfillment of personal growth. Then came an unexpected turn. One busy afternoon, as I was consulting with a client, my phone rang persistently. Excusing myself, I stepped out to answer, finding Lisa, my cousin and the owner of the apartment I once shared with Ethan, on the other line. "Anna, there's trouble." Lisa's voice was tense. "Ethan and his mother are facing eviction. They haven't paid rent in months, and now they're asking for my help." The news was a shock, but not entirely surprising. Ethan's financial recklessness had been a growing concern, one that I had distanced myself from. Lisa's request was clear. She needed my help to sort this out, to confront Ethan and his mother about their obligations. I agreed to meet with them, not out of obligation to Ethan, but to support Lisa, who had always been a pillar in my life. The meeting was set in the very apartment I had left behind. Walking in, I was struck by how much it had changed. The once orderly and stylish space was cluttered, the air heavy with the tension of broken promises and unmet responsibilities. Ethan and Mrs. Harper were there, their expressions a mix of embarrassment and defiance. Lisa, ever the picture of composure, led the discussion. "Ethan, you know the terms of the lease. You've fallen behind, and this can't continue. I'm sorry, but you need to vacate the apartment," she said firmly. Ethan's response was a mix of excuses and pleas for leniency, a far cry from the confident man he once portrayed. Mrs. Harper, too, chimed in, her tone desperate. "Anna, please, you have to help us," she pleaded, turning to me. "You were part of this family, too." But I was no longer the person they once knew. "I'm sorry, but my helping is not an option. You both need to take responsibility for your actions." The meeting ended with a clear understanding that they had to leave the apartment. As I left, I felt a sense of closure, not just for myself, but for a chapter that had long needed ending. It was a poignant reminder of how our choices shape our destinies, and how, in the end, we are all accountable for the paths we choose. As the leaves began to turn, signaling the arrival of autumn, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. The challenges, the heartaches, and the triumphs had all woven into the fabric of my life, each thread a vital part of who I had become. The clinic was bustling with activity, a vibrant hub that mirrored my own personal growth. I had expanded my team, bringing in talented individuals who shared my vision of empowering others through self-care. My clients weren't just customers, they were part of a community we were building together. One crisp morning, as I sipped my coffee, I opened a letter from Ethan. It was brief, a simple acknowledgement of our divorce being finalized. The words were formal, but in them I sensed a tone of regret, perhaps even a hint of gratitude. I set the letter aside, feeling a sense of peace. Our chapter had ended, but our stories continued, each on our own path. In the solitude of my apartment, now a cozy sanctuary that reflected my tastes and ambitions, I contemplated the lessons I had learned. I had discovered an inner strength I never knew I possessed, a resilience that had carried me through the storm. I had learned the importance of boundaries, of speaking up for oneself, and of the courage it takes to walk away from situations that no longer serve us. My thoughts turned to Ethan and Mrs. Harper. Despite the pain they had caused, I harbored no ill will. I wished them well on their journey, hoping they would find their own lessons in the choices they had made. Looking ahead, I felt a surge of excitement for the future. My dreams for the clinic were evolving, with plans to collaborate with local charities and expand our wellness programs. Personally, I was open to new experiences, to the possibilities of love and companionship, but on my terms, with the wisdom gained from my past. As I closed the door to my apartment, stepping out into the brisk morning air, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life, with all its unpredictability, was a beautiful, ever-changing tapestry. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, to weave new dreams and adventures into the story of Anna Mitchell. I hesitated for just a second before picking up the phone, already bracing myself for another unpleasant exchange. Paul often called me at the worst possible times, but this time was different. The lines of worry etched across my face deepened as I answered. "What is it now, Paul? I hate to break it to you, but my girlfriend is pregnant." His voice was flat, emotionless. "She's 18 years younger than me. I guess what I'm saying is, I'm leaving you, Anna. Getting a divorce. That's cool with you, right?" I gripped the phone tighter, the edges digging into my palm. My other hand involuntarily clenched into a fist, an outward display of the inner turmoil I was struggling to suppress. After years of tension and disappointment, I should have been prepared for something like this. But the sheer audacity of his request left me momentarily speechless. Before I could formulate a response, my thoughts were interrupted by a more pressing concern: the well-being of our son, or rather my stepson, Sam. At 16, he would be far from oblivious to the goings-on in our suddenly fractured household. He had always been a sensitive kid, finely attuned to the fault lines of our family. As if on cue, a soft knocking came from the door of the study, the only room I considered mine in the sprawling house that Paul and I shared. "Mom, is everything all right?" It was Sam's voice, tinged with the worry that I had come to recognize all too well. Momentarily neglecting Paul, who was still droning on about something or another, I softened my voice and replied, "I'll be out in a minute, sweetie. Just wrapping up a call." Turning back to the matter at hand, I found my voice. "Listen, Paul, we'll discuss the divorce later. What's most important now is Samantha. If we're going through with this, you need to take responsibility for him. For now, please just let this settle before you do anything else rash." There was a pause on the other end, and then an exasperated sigh. "Anna, don't start with this. He's your kid too." Technically he was right, but the unpleasant truth, and perhaps my most powerful card, was still tucked tightly against my chest, a reminder of the complex emotional and legal dynamics that had bound our little family together. The silence on my end seemed to unnerve him, and he blurted out, "You know what? Fine, we'll talk about this later." And with that, he hung up. Releasing a sigh I hadn't realized I was holding, I placed the phone down and pinched the bridge of my nose, an ineffectual attempt to fend off the headache brewing just beneath the surface. Sam was waiting just outside the door when I emerged, his eyes searching mine for an explanation I wasn't yet ready to provide. I mustered a reassuring smile and looped an arm around his shoulders, guiding him back to the living room. "Let's not worry about that call," I said, although we both knew that was a near impossibility. "Why don't you tell me about your day instead?" And as he launched into a story about his latest project in art class, I clung to the normalcy of our conversation like a lifeline, knowing full well that the storm clouds were gathering just beyond the horizon. That night, as the house lay quiet and shadows played against the walls from the street lamps outside, my mind began to drift back in time. The memories came unbidden, a cascade of moments revealing a completely different version of the man I had married. I settled into my armchair, a relic from my pre-Paul days, and let the past unravel itself. I was 27 when I met Paul, an independent marketing expert with a penchant for brand revival. He came to me as a client, but soon became more. We were both rebounding from past relationships. Mine was a tale of young love that burned out too brightly, and his was a marriage wrecked by infidelity. It didn't take long for Paul to sweep me into a whirlwind romance, complete with tender looks and promises of always putting family first. His son, whom he had full custody of, was named Sam. At the tender age of 3, the boy had a mop of curly hair and eyes so wide they seemed to swallow the world around him. Paul would bring him along on our dates, saying, "Just until we find a good sitter." But as time went by, it became an unspoken arrangement, one that didn't bother me as much as I thought it might. Despite my initial reservations, there were fleeting moments where our trio felt like a glimpse of the family life I'd never known I wanted. It was both cozy and exciting, and I began to think that perhaps I could step into this role that the universe had seemingly carved out just for me. So when Paul proposed a year into our relationship, presenting not only a ring but a family unit, I said yes, with hardly a second thought. but the rosy glow of new marriage faded with startling rapidity. As soon as our honeymoon was over, literally and metaphorically, the real Paul began to surface. His facade of a doting father cracked and fell away, leaving behind a man who seemed increasingly indifferent to his son's existence. Work was always his convenient excuse. Even when the underlying note of sadness in Sam's voice couldn't be missed, Paul would shrug it off, leaving me to soothe away the sting of abandonment. I tried to voice my concerns, but Paul's temper flared up easily. "It's not your place," he would say, dismissing my attempts to navigate a healthy dynamic between father and son. As time wore on, I tried to be everything Sam needed, steadfast and present, unlike his father. I attended school plays alone, cheering twice as loud to make up for the space where Paul should have been. And with every small absence, with every unkept promise, a bitter seed of resentment took root in my heart. Now, in the subdued light of my living room, as sleep teased at the edges of my consciousness, I couldn't help but wonder when exactly my marriage had slipped from being a partnership to a performance, and at what point I had lost myself in this charade of family life. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting lines of light and shadow across my face. I took a moment to steel myself for whatever trials the day might bring, after last night's revelations. The silence of the house was a stark contrast to the chaos of my thoughts. Sam was still asleep, his door ajar and his breathing steady. I let out a quiet sigh of relief that he could at least find some peace during these turbulent times. The urge to protect him from the incoming storm was visceral, but I could not hide forever behind a facade of calm domesticity. Hesitantly, I revisited the idea of returning to work, part-time at least. It wasn't just about the money, although our family's financial future was uncertain with the looming divorce. It was about regaining a semblance of the independence I had once taken for granted. I remembered my conversation with Paul about this a few years back. "A part-time job?" Paul had scoffed, slouched on the couch with a beer in hand. "What's that for? Some pocket money for shopping?" His laughter still echoed in my mind, a bitter reminder of his condescension. "It's for Sam." I had shot back, my voice firm. "He's growing up, and there are expenses. School supplies, extracurricular activities, and I want to help." Paul's only response had been a shrug before he dimmed the room with the TV's glow. But the next morning, when his head was clearer, he had grudgingly agreed, tossing the declaration at me like it was a breadcrumb. And so I slipped back into a familiar role in the marketing world, but on my own terms. My former boss had welcomed me back with open arms, aware of the tumultuous tide I was navigating at home. The balancing act was taxing, juggling domestic duties with the demands of work, but it provided a lifeline. A reminder that I was more than just someone's cast-off wife. It felt invigorating to reclaim a piece of my identity. That liberation was cut short one evening when my work commitments saw me arriving home later than usual to find Paul pacing in the foyer, a snarl twisting his lips. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "I was at my part-time job," I replied, weary and not in the mood for another confrontation. "Meeting some man, right?" He seized my arm, his fingers biting into my skin. "Is that it, Anna? Tell me!" The absurd accusation struck me like a slap. Paul's distrust was a grotesque mirror that reflected his infidelities, not mine. I wrenched my arm away from his grip, denial falling from my lips in heated, vehement waves. But Paul, never one to back down, demanded to see my phone, to delve into the intricacies of a life he so often shunned. I watched frozen as he dialed my boss's number, that single action shattering any facade of trust we might have still shared. I could have drowned in the silence that followed my boss's clear-cut clarification. Paul's lame attempt at an excuse was nothing more than a shrug and a suggestion that I should have been more careful, if only to save him the embarrassment. Since then, my days were colored with a rising dread of future altercations, a dread that had seeped steadily into my heart, setting up residence alongside the growing hollow of my love for Paul. Now, as I sat upright in my armchair, a cup of cold coffee abandoned on the table before me, the inevitability of our situation settled heavily upon my shoulders. We were past the point of repair. The notion of us existed now only in the fragmented memories of a time when I believed in the possibility of a happy ending. As the days slipped by in an unsettled quiet, life took on a stuttering rhythm. I tried to protect Sam from the growing tensions while I navigated the minefield that my marriage had become. I felt a cold knot at the pit of my stomach every time I caught sight of Paul's car parked outside, his comings and goings now as erratic as his moods. One afternoon, my work took me near Paul's corporate office, a swanky high-rise that seemed to scrape the clouds. A familiar prickling discomfort grew within me as I walked by. Even after all these years, I had never quite come to consider that towering glass monolith as a part of my world. It was Paul's territory, a place where I had little reason or desire to venture until now. As fate would have it, I caught sight of Paul's car parked across the street. There was a figure seated beside him, unmistakable by its youthfulness and the animated gestures that accompanied a fit of laughter between them. With a heavy heart, I realized this must be the younger girlfriend, the one carrying his child. My hands shook with a volatile mix of anger and anxiety as I snapped a picture. I didn't know what I intended to do with it, but the private investigator my friend had mentioned once seemed like a good place to start. Secrecy wasn't something with which I was comfortable, yet the situation seemed to call for it. As the evidence of Paul's duplicity gathered in the hands of the PI, a morbid sense of satisfaction intermingled with my pain. It was ironic how the truth often surfaces when one starts digging in the right places. At home, Sam's obliviousness was a mercy and a curse. The moments we shared, him asking for help with his college applications or discussing his art projects, were pockets of normalcy that kept me anchored. Yet the looming specter of the truth felt heavier by the day. How long could I keep this all from him, and when the time came, how would he view his father or me? Paul seemed oblivious to the undercurrents, too consumed by his extramarital escapades to notice, or perhaps he simply didn't care. Our interactions were stilted, and more often than not, he wore an expression of annoyance that would crescendo into aggression if pressed. It was during one of these strained conversations that the dam finally broke. Clutching the preliminary report from the PI, I let my gaze harden when I addressed him. "I don't know which is worse," I started, the frost in my voice matching the icy glare I fixed on him. "The fact that you're cheating, or that you were so sloppy about hiding it." Paul's reaction was a bizarre blend of shock and defiance. "What are you talking about, Anna?" "I'm talking about your barely legal mistress and the baby that you claim is yours." I pushed the paper across the table, watching as his eyes darted over the incriminating photos and the sterile, typed-up accounts of his infidelity. The room went dead silent for a second too long before I eventually added, "You're going to need to take better care of Sam. He's your responsibility, Paul." "You can't mean that," Paul retorted weakly. "What about everything we've been through?" I mustered the full force of my resolve when I addressed him, the cut of betrayal slicing through each word. "Because, Paul, as much as I love Sam, I've never legally adopted him. He's not my child, he's yours with your ex-wife." Paul's stunned silence was answer enough. The truth hung between us an unscalable wall. It was a final acknowledgement of a relationship that had been fraying at the seams long before his affair. In the quiet aftermath, I slipped silently out of the room and made my way to the one place I now considered an asylum, Sam's room. His earnest smile and oblivious chatter were the only consolation I had left in the ever-complicating mess of my married life. Sitting at the kitchen table the next morning, I sipped my tea, staring at the steam curling upwards like wistful spirits seeking escape from their liquid confines. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that seems to press against your ears. A silence ripe with words not yet spoken, truths not yet revealed. There was a knock at the door, solemn and perfunctory. It was Paul, his face a grim mask of confrontation, his jaw twitching with pent-up frustration. In tow was Emma, the young woman whose involvement with my husband had upended my life. Her belly was now showing the early signs of pregnancy, and she moved with the tentative touch of someone navigating new terrain. "Anna," Paul began, "we need to talk." The frigid air between us crackled with tension as I remained silent, nodding slightly for him to continue. With hesitant boldness, Emma spoke up. "I've heard a lot about you. And Sam. He's a good kid, right? You've been parenting him for over a decade." "Indeed," I replied coolly. "Sam is a remarkable young man." Then why abandon him now? Emma's voice wavered slightly, betraying her underlying apprehension. The question stung, but I kept my composure. It's not a matter of want, Emma. Legally speaking, he is not my child. I could see the confusion in her eyes, her furtive glances at Paul searching for reassurance or explanation. Paul, seemingly prepared for a different outcome, appeared lost. But we're married, Anna. Isn't that enough? No, it's not, I said firmly. To make a stepchild one's own, one must legally adopt them. I never did. Adoption? Emma frowned, the concept foreign to her. Exactly, I continued. Without that, I have no claim over Sam, no obligations or rights. Paul's face paled. What does this mean for us, then? It means you're fully responsible for Sam's upbringing. I am not abandoning him, but I cannot, in good legal conscience, take him with me. Your actions have consequences, Paul. There was a pause as the weight of my words settled over us like a shroud. Look, this is a mess, I concluded, standing up. I'm willing to discuss a fair divorce settlement, but Sam's care is not negotiable. He's your son. The conversation ended with Paul's defeatist surrender. Emma's protests were cut short by a simple, yet stern look. They left in a huff, the door closing behind them with a decisive click, the sound echoing the closing chapter of our marriage. It was only after their car was out of sight that I allowed myself a single solitary tear. My grief was not for the loss of Paul, already a ghost in my heart, but for the upheaval that Sam's life was about to undergo. I vowed then and there to protect him as much as I could, no matter the legal ties that bound or separated us. Days passed in a haze of legal consultations and muted emotions. I navigated through them with the determination of someone who knows there's no turning back. Every ring of the phone, every knock on the door, I was braced for another battle, another bitter exchange. In a strange turn of the tide, Paul's inevitable retaliation came not in the form of tantrums or threats, but with him dragging Emma into the sanctity of our home. The tension was thick, a tangible entity as they stood there, a united but unstable front. Anna, Paul began, urgency bordering on desperation clouding his voice. You can't just back out and let everything fall apart because our situation changed. I could only nod, urging him to continue while mentally preparing my counter-argument. I was not going to be swayed by emotional pleas or twisted logic. Emma, her arms protectively cradling her unborn future, found her voice amidst the unease. Surely there's a way you can keep Sam. You were his mother for so long. Her words hung in the air, and I felt a pang of sympathy for her, caught in the crossfire of our crumbling marriage. Emma, I did not abandon Sam. Paul did when he chose to pursue a relationship outside of our marriage. One cannot just discard responsibilities because it's inconvenient, I replied, my voice even but firm. The legality of my relationship with Sam is clear. No formal adoption, no parental rights. It's always been that way. The confusion in Emma's eyes mirrored the same dawning realization I saw in Paul's. It was then I decided to divulge the final nail in their contrived coffin. I retrieved the folder containing the evidence of Emma's infidelity, the product of the private investigator's thorough work. Her breath hitched audibly as she scanned the photos and accompanying reports. This child, I began, placing an incriminating photo of Emma with a man not Paul on the table. It doesn't belong to you, does it, Paul? Silence consumed the room as Paul's gaze fixated on the photograph, slowly twisting from confusion to anger. He rounded on Emma with glaring accusation. Is this true? His voice was barely above a whisper, but each word was laced with betrayal. Emma's stammered denial, negated by the evidence before her eyes, only fueled Paul's fury. You led me on. Paul's words were venomous, his expression an amalgam of rage and hurt. Observing the scene unfold with a detached, academic interest, I felt the chains of my marriage finally slacken. Do what you must with each other. Sam and I will adapt, as we always have. I expect you'll do the same, I uttered with finality, excusing myself from the brewing storm. As I made my way to the haven of my study, their heated exchanges muffled by the closed door, I focused on the sound of my steady breaths and the knowledge that Sam and I would face brighter days ahead. It was not the end of our story, merely the beginning of a new chapter. In the wake of the crumbling illusions and the raw truths laid bare, my thoughts turned toward the future with a steely resolve. It was within the confines of my study, among the legal pads scribbled with thoughts and potential strategies, that I formulated my next steps. A decisive course of action was necessary, both for Sam's well-being and for my emancipation from the life I had known. I reached out to my attorney, a meticulous and forthright woman named Miss Carter, who had been a guardian angel of sorts throughout this ordeal. "It's time to discuss the terms of the divorce and the division of property," I told her over a secure line, each word a hammer driving nails into the coffin of my marriage. Miss Carter assured me she would arrange for us to move forward with pragmatic efficiency, and I trusted her implicitly. Preparing for this legal battle was like bracing for a storm. Security measures were a necessity, not a luxury. Within days, a meeting was orchestrated to discuss the partition of our lives into neatly quantifiable assets and liabilities. Paul's disposition fluctuated between anger and spiteful acquiescence. But through it all, I remained firmly anchored to my objectives. As if play-acting the part of the dutiful wife one last time, I served coffee and brought out the ledger of our once shared existence, slipping into the uncomfortable but familiar role of his domestic partner. Trying to eke out my dignity from our divide was akin to navigating a boat through rocky shoals, each potential compromise on material possessions a risk that might capsize an already unstable situation. But Sam's future was the lighthouse guiding me. Everything I did was to ensure he would not be left adrift in the wake of our split. Paul hesitated, his expression a mask of consternation as we discussed alimony and the financial stipulations going forward. "How can we possibly unwind everything we've built?" he asked, a note of plea underlying his usual assertiveness. "We can, and we will," I assured him, my tone laced with an undercurrent of fatigue. "It's not just about us anymore." The air grew colder, the silence starker, as we both signed the papers that would render our shared history into nothing more than a transaction, an exchange of worldly goods and bruised promises. I hesitated only once, my pen hovering over the document as the finality of it all settled into my bones. Each stroke of my signature was a release, a liberation from the ties that no longer served me, or Sam. As Paul left, his departure was without the dramatic flourish of our past arguments. Instead, a quiet, anticlimactic exit that allowed the gentle closing of the door to serve as his final goodbye. Retreating to the solace of my solitude, I reflected on what it meant to let go, to relinquish the dreams of what could have been for the reality of what must be. In the quiet aftermath, a newfound sense of pride welled within me. I would steer my destiny with a steady hand, come what may. The jagged edge of reality set in as I sat at my vanity, staring into the mirror at the woman I had become. A woman hardened by betrayal, but not broken by it. With each brushstroke through my hair, I steeled myself for the confrontation to come. I was tired of the shadow games and half-truths. It was time to drag everything into the light. Donning my armor of a charcoal business suit that accentuated my newfound resolve, I arrived at Paul's place of work, a towering testament to his professional success and personal failures. Blending into the anonymous flow of the city's morning hustle, I passed through the revolving doors of his corporate fortress with one objective: to ensure there would be no further avoidance or delays in the settlement of our divorce. Paul's supervisor, Mr. Green, was a man I had met but a few times, always in the periphery of company galas and charitable events. His demeanor carried the gravity of someone who understood the weight of his position, and as I sat in the waiting area of his office, I folded my hands, ready to lay out my case. The door to Mr. Green's office opened, and Paul's figure appeared, confusion marring his otherwise stern features. He had clearly been interrupted, pulled from whatever business matters had occupied his day. I could sense his annoyance, but the burning urgency in my gaze was enough to silence whatever complaint he might have vocalized. Mr. Green extended his hand, a practiced smile affixed to his face as he addressed me. "Miss Simmons, what brings you to our office today?" I took a deep breath, framing my thoughts into coherent sentences. The matter at hand is personal, but it has reached a point where I can no longer wait for my soon-to-be ex-husband to do the right thing. Our divorce must proceed, and I need assurance he will cooperate. Paul stiffened, his eyes darting to Mr. Green, then back to me. It was clear he had never anticipated our private discord intersecting with his professional life. "Please understand, Mr. Green, I continued. "My visit here is not to scandalize or to seek retribution, but to move forward with transparency and closure." The air between us was charged, the hum of company operations outside Mr. Green's door now a distant murmur. I watched as Mr. Green considered my words, his expression morphing from one of cordiality to concern. "I assure you, Mr. Green," I finished, "that our personal grievances will not impact Paul's responsibilities here at the company. I am merely seeking resolution so we may both proceed with our lives." Paul's protests were interwoven with pleas for discretion, but the truth couldn't be simpler. We were beyond the point of secrets and saving face. With a nod, Mr. Green assured me he would encourage Paul's cooperation. The meeting adjourned with a heavy finality, leaving me to navigate my way back out into the bustle of the city. As I walked, the gravity of my actions began to sink in. I had walked into the lion's den unflinching, laying bare the truth to the powers that would most impact Paul's decision-making. It wasn't long before news of the scandal made its way through the office grapevine. Paul and Emma's illicit relationship, once shrouded in whispers, was now cast into the unforgiving light of day. Emma's position within the company, intertwined as it was with her personal entanglements, became unmanageable. The fallout was swift and irrevocable for both of them, their reputations tarnished and their professional standing compromised. I returned home to the quiet of my study, allowing myself the brief luxury of unraveled composure. The sky outside was overcast, heavy with unreleased rain, a mirror to my own emotional state. Paul and Emma's fate was no longer my concern. I had severed the ties that bound me to their downfall. It was time for me to focus on the path ahead, to embrace whatever came next, with eyes wide open and heart slowly mending. Now, with the anticipation of an uncertain future tingling at my fingertips, I prepared myself for the next chapter, one that I would author on my own terms. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of change and, unexpectedly, hope. I was offered a full-time position at the marketing firm where I had found solace in part-time work, a lifeline that became a vessel for transformation. Gripping the opportunity with both hands, I dove into the work I loved, allowing it to support and reshape the newfound life that Sam and I were building. Sam was navigating his own changes, adapting to the shifting landscape of our family structure with a maturity beyond his years. Discussions of college applications and plans for the future became our new anchor points as we forged ahead in unison. One evening, as the soft glow of the sunset bathed the living room in warmth, Sam approached me, hesitant yet excited. "Mom," he began, "there's someone I want you to meet. I'm seeing someone, and, well, I think you'll like her." His words touched a tender spot within me. Even as he spoke, he fidgeted with the hem of his shirt, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "Sam, I'd be delighted to meet her," I assured him, my heart swelling. "But are you sure you're okay with me being there? I mean, after everything." He stopped me with a look, a knowing, reassuring gaze. "Mom, no matter how things ended with Paul, you were always there for me. You're my family. I want you to be part of this." As we shared a warm embrace, I realized that our bonds were indeed stronger than I had ever dared to hope. Sam's resilience and love gave me the strength to be the parent he deserved, regardless of any legal definition. With the official divorce proceedings behind us, my life took on a different rhythm, one filled with promise and productivity. The undertow of loneliness that often accompanied my nights slowly ebbed away, replaced by a sense of peace and fulfillment. Sam's presence was a constant reminder of the continuity of love and care I had provided over the years. Our interactions became less about filling the gaps left by Paul and more about celebrating each milestone, each victory, no matter how small. The college acceptance letter arrived like a beacon of triumph, its crisp white envelope holding so much more than just words. Inside was validation of Sam's talent, determination, and the future he was destined to seize. As he read the contents aloud, his voice crackled with emotion, and I felt my own chest tighten with pride. My own eyes grew misty as he looked up at me, the joy in his face mirrored in my own smile. This was our victory, one made sweeter by the struggles we had overcome. Whatever lay ahead, I knew we would face it together, buoyed by the understanding that family is not merely defined by blood, but by the shared experiences and unconditional support that bonds us. And as Sam set his sights on the horizon, ready to embrace college life and all the challenges it would bring. I stood by, ready to support him as I had always promised, as I would always do. With each passing day, the woman I saw in the mirror grew stronger, surer, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit forged in the fire of adversity and emerging, triumphant and hopeful, into the light of a new beginning. Months melded into a new kind of normalcy, the raw wounds of the past now healing into scars, reminders of battles fought and strength earned. In the solitude of my revitalized life, news of Paul and Emma reached me only in fragments, echoes of the life I had left behind. Through conversations with Mr. Green, whom I had come to regard as an ally in the corporate world, I learned that the once cohesive front Paul and Emma had presented had crumbled into a spectacle of blame and acrimony. The affair, once shrouded in secrecy, was now a specter that haunted their professional and personal lives with equal persistence. Their relationship buckled under the weight of public scrutiny and personal betrayals. Without the security of established careers at Paul's company, they found themselves adrift in a sea of their own making. The court battle over Emma's claims of emotional abuse and her subsequent demands for compensation was a drawn-out affair, leaving them both exposed and vulnerable. In the end, it was not just their careers that suffered a fatal blow, but their relationship too. Emma, still pregnant and now shouldering the disdain of her family, retreated from the public eye and the ire of her once lover. Paul, meanwhile, found himself unemployed at an age where starting over was more of a challenge than a prospect. Reports suggested he eventually settled for a part-time position at a local store, a shadow of his former glory. As these whispers of their struggles reached me, I found myself reflecting not with malice, but with a somber acknowledgement of life's unpredictable tides. There was no joy in their downfall, only the quiet affirmation that every choice leads us down a path of our own making. For Sam and me, the path was one of growth and newfound harmony. As he embarked on his college journey, I watched him navigate his newfound independence with the same resilience and integrity that had seen him through the chaos of our fractured family life. It was a bittersweet farewell when I dropped him off at his dormitory, but one filled with the promise of his bright future. Back in the fortress of my own rebuilding, surrounded by the familiar comforts of a home that had seen too much yet stood resilient, my career flourished. Returning as a full-time employee had reignited a passion that I had thought lost, infusing my days with purpose and fulfillment. In moments of solitude, I would sometimes catch myself marveling at the strength and serenity that had grown from the ashes of my previous life. There was a newfound sense of self that permeated every aspect of my existence, a calm confidence that whispered assurances of the possibilities that lay ahead. In the evenings when the golden glow of sunset bathed my garden in its warm embrace, I would think of Sam's parting words, that regardless of our lack of legal tie, I had always been and would always remain his true parent, in every sense that truly mattered. It was in these quiet moments that I knew the love and bonds we shared transcended all else. Our narrative had been one of trials and transformation, with the final pages yet to be written. Together and yet apart, we moved forward into our separate futures. A son stepping boldly into the world he would shape, and a mother standing proud, her resolve unshaken, ready for whatever chapters were yet to come.